On a freezing January morning in 1649, a king was led to his own execution. He wasn't struck down in battle by a foreign army, but condemned as a tyrant, traitor, and murderer by his own subjects. He was about to be beheaded in a public spectacle, a punishment designed to be as final as it was symbolic. How on earth did it come to this? How did a parliament, once full of loyal subjects, find a way to legally execute their own monarch, a man who was certain he'd been chosen by God? This is the unprecedented story of the king who lost his head by law. To understand how a king ends up on trial for his life, you have to understand the man at the center of the storm, King Charles I. When Charles took the thrones of England, Scotland, and Ireland in 1625, he did so with an unshakable belief that would define his every action and ultimately seal his fate. It was called the divine right of kings. This wasn't just a fancy title, it was a core political and religious belief. Charles was convinced his authority came directly from God, which meant he was accountable to God alone. In his mind, Parliament was there to advise him and give him money, not to question his decisions. He truly believed a king could do no wrong, legally or morally. But the England Charles inherited was changing. Parliament, especially the House of Commons, was getting more confident and powerful. It no longer saw itself as just the king's bank, but as the voice of the people, with a right to a say in how the country was run. This was a collision course waiting to happen. A king who thought he was above the law, and a parliament that believed it was the law. For years, they were locked in a bitter power struggle over taxes, religion, and the limits of the king's power. Whenever Parliament pushed back, Charles would just dissolve it and rule alone for years at a time, a move that only deepened the anger and distrust, pushing the kingdom closer to its breaking point. Those simmering tensions finally boiled over. The English Civil War, which kicked off in 1642, was a brutal conflict that split the nation apart, pitting neighbor against neighbor and family against family. On one side, you had the Royalists, or Cavaliers, fighting for the king and his divine right. On the other, the Parliamentarians, or Roundheads, fighting for the rights of Parliament and a monarchy with less power. The war wasn't just about politics, it was also tangled up in deep religious divides, fierce disagreements between Protestants and Catholics, and even among Protestants themselves, threw gasoline on the fire. For almost 5 years, England was torn apart by a war that was really a battle for the soul of the nation. In the end, the Parliamentarians' new model army, a disciplined and professional fighting force, proved to be the difference maker. In 1647, King Charles I was defeated and captured, but his capture created a problem no one had ever faced before. What do you do with a captured king? He was held for nearly 2 years while his enemies debated his fate. Charles, still certain of his divine status, thought they couldn't possibly rule without him. He played for time, engaging in secret plots and even trying to start another war from his prison. That refusal to admit defeat, that treachery in their eyes, convinced many in Parliament that there could be no real peace as long as he was alive. They decided that for the nation to move on, the king had to answer for the war's devastation. This is where the story takes a sharp turn into uncharted legal waters. In January 1649, the House of Commons did something revolutionary. Without approval from the House of Lords or the King's consent, it passed an act to create a special new court, the High Court of Justice. Its only job was to put the King of England on trial. To justify it, the Commons declared that as the chosen representatives of the people, they held the ultimate power in the nation, a complete rejection of the divine right of kings. The charge against Charles was as stunning as the trial itself: high treason. For centuries, treason was a crime against the king. Now Parliament was flipping the script. They argued the king had committed treason against the nation by waging war on his own people and parliament. The indictment accused him of trying to subvert the ancient and fundamental laws and liberties of this nation, blaming him for all the death and destruction of the civil wars. The trial began on January 20th, 1649, in the Grand Westminster Hall. The air was thick with tension. 135 judges were appointed, but many were too scared to show up. The court's president, John Bradshaw, sat in a crimson velvet chair, and across from him, in a matching chair, sat King Charles I, completely alone. From the very start, Charles refused to play along. When asked to plead, he questioned the court's very existence. "I would know by what power I am called hither," he demanded. "I would know by what authority I mean lawful." He argued that no court on earth could try a king and that the House of Commons had no legal right to create one. He stood on the age-old principle that the king can do no wrong. The prosecution argued that the king wasn't a person, but an office given power for the people's good. If that power was abused, the person holding the office could be held accountable. The court's position was simple and radical. No one, not even a king, is above the law. The trial dragged on, with Charles stubbornly refusing to enter a plea. In one tense moment, he tapped the prosecutor with his silver-tipped cane, which then broke and fell, a perfect symbol of his own broken authority. His refusal to plead was eventually treated as a confession. On January 27, 1649, the court found Charles I guilty of being a tyrant, traitor, murderer, and a public enemy to the good people of this nation. The sentence was death by beheading. A death warrant was drawn up, and over the next few days, 59 commissioners signed it, men who were now and forever the king's executioners. They had crossed a line, and there was no going back. On the morning of January 30th, 1649, King Charles I prepared for his death with a surprising sense of calm. It was a bitterly cold day, and he famously asked for a second shirt so the crowd wouldn't mistake a shiver for fear. He was escorted by guards across St. James's Park to the banqueting house in Whitehall, the very building that had once been a symbol of his royal power. A huge, silent crowd had gathered to watch the unthinkable. A scaffold draped in black had been built just outside a window. He was led onto the platform where he saw the execution block and the masked executioner. He gave a short speech, but the guards kept the crowd so far back that almost no one could hear his final words. In them, he maintained his innocence, called himself a martyr of the people, and forgave those who were about to kill him. Then he knelt, said a prayer, and laid his head on the block. With one clean strike of the axe, the King of England was dead. A groan of shock and horror went through the crowd. For the first and only time in history, a monarch had been put on trial and executed by his own people. The execution of Charles I sent shockwaves across England and all of Europe. Right after, the monarchy was abolished, and England was declared a commonwealth, a republic. The very idea of treason was changed forever. It was now a crime against the state, not the king. But the republic didn't last. By 1660, the monarchy was restored, and Charles's son, Charles II, took the throne. The restoration brought a brutal reckoning for the men who had signed the king's death warrant. Many of the 59 regicides were hunted down, tried, and executed for treason themselves. Still, the idea behind Charles I's trial never really went away. The principle that a ruler could be held accountable, that they weren't above the law, had been planted. It was a seed that would eventually grow into the constitutional monarchy and parliamentary democracy we see today. The execution forever changed the relationship between the government and the governed in England, setting a powerful, bloody precedent that a state's power ultimately comes from its people, not from God. The king who lost his head by law left behind a legacy that reshaped a nation and has influenced political thought for centuries. If you found this story of rebellion and justice fascinating, be sure to subscribe and hit the like button for more looks at pivotal moments in history. Let us know in the comments. Was Parliament justified in executing its king? Was it a necessary evil to build a new future or a step too far? We'd love to hear what you think. Thanks for watching.